There's a moment in every person's life when the noise of the world falls silent, and you're left standing at a crossroads with only your own heartbeat for company. It's in that sacred silence that you discover something profound. The person you've been waiting for to save you, to validate you, to give you permission to be who you truly are, that person has been with you all along. I want you to think about a butterfly for a moment. Not the graceful creature we see dancing from flower to flower, but the struggle that happens inside that chrysalis. No one can help that caterpillar transform. No amount of encouragement from other butterflies, no matter how well-intentioned, can assist in that metamorphosis. The caterpillar must dissolve everything it has ever known about itself and trust in a process it has never experienced. It must take that step into the unknown completely alone. This is the paradox of human growth. Our greatest breakthroughs happen not when we're surrounded by others telling us we can do it, but when we're stripped down to our essence, standing naked before our own potential, with nothing but our inner knowing to guide us. I've spent decades studying human behavior and the psychology of personal transformation, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful, who has ever broken free from the limitations that once defined them, had to take at least one crucial step entirely on their own. Not because they were antisocial or didn't value relationships, but because there are certain passages in life that can only be walked alone. Think about the great spiritual teachers throughout history. Buddha left his palace and his family to sit alone under the Bodhi tree. Jesus withdrew to the desert for 40 days. Muhammad retreated to the cave of Hira. These weren't acts of abandonment or selfishness. They were acts of profound courage. They understood that to find their authentic voice, they first had to silence all the other voices competing for their attention. But you don't have to be a spiritual teacher to understand this truth. Maybe you're a mother who has spent so many years caring for everyone else that you've forgotten who you are beneath all those roles. Maybe you're an employee who has been playing it safe for so long that your dreams feel like distant memories. Maybe you're a person who has been seeking approval from others for so long that you've never learned to approve of yourself. Whatever your situation, there comes a moment when you realize that waiting for permission, waiting for support, waiting for the perfect circumstances, waiting for anything outside yourself is just another form of procrastination. It's a way of avoiding the one conversation you've been dreading, the conversation with your authentic self. I remember a story a woman shared with me years ago. She had been married for 23 years to a man who, while not abusive, had slowly convinced her that her dreams were impractical, her ideas were silly, and her desire to start her own business was just a phase she'd get over. For 2 decades, she believed him. She believed that her role was to support his dreams while quietly burying her own. Then one day, she was organizing old photo albums and came across a picture of herself from college. In that photo, her eyes were bright with possibility. She was holding a business plan she'd written for a course, grinning from ear to ear. She remembered that young woman, the one who believed she could change the world, the one who stayed up all night working on ideas that excited her, the one who saw opportunity everywhere she looked. As she sat there holding that photograph, she realized she had a choice. She could continue living someone else's version of her life, or she could take a step alone toward reclaiming the person she used to be. Not the person her husband wanted her to be, not the person her family expected her to be, but the person she knew in her heart she was meant to be. That night, she didn't discuss it with anyone. She didn't seek advice or ask for opinions. She simply opened her laptop and began writing a business plan. It was the first step she had taken for herself, by herself, in over 2 decades, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 6 months later, she had left her marriage and started her own consulting firm. 2 years after that, she was employing 15 people and had tripled her former household income. But more importantly, when you looked into her eyes, you could see that bright possibility again. She had found her way back to herself, and the journey began with a single step that she had to take alone. This is what I mean when I say that sometimes the strongest step forward is the one you take alone. It's not about rejecting others or becoming isolated. It's about recognizing that there are certain decisions, certain transformations, certain leaps of faith that can only be made when you stop looking outside yourself for validation and start trusting the wisdom that already exists within you. Society has conditioned us to believe that we need consensus for our choices, that we need support groups for our dreams, that we need cheerleaders for our goals. And while community and support are beautiful things, they can also become crutches that keep us from discovering our own strength. Sometimes the very act of seeking everyone else's opinion is a way of avoiding our own. I think about Thomas Edison, working alone in his laboratory night after night, failing thousands of times before creating the light bulb. His contemporaries thought he was crazy. The scientific community dismissed many of his ideas, but he had learned something that many of us never learn. The opinion that matters most is the one you have of yourself and your vision. Or consider Emily Dickinson, writing poem after poem in the solitude of her room, with no external validation, no publisher beating down her door, no literary community embracing her work. She wrote because she had to write, because something inside her demanded expression, regardless of whether anyone else understood or appreciated it. She took step after step alone, creating a body of work that would eventually be recognized as some of the finest poetry in the English language. These weren't antisocial hermits. These were people who understood that creativity, authenticity, and personal growth require periods of solitude, moments when you disconnect from the external world and connect deeply with your internal compass. But here's what's beautiful about taking that step alone. Once you do, you discover that you were never really alone at all. You were accompanied by something far more reliable than human opinion. You were accompanied by your own inner wisdom, your own strength, your own unlimited potential. I want you to consider the areas of your life where you've been waiting. Maybe you've been waiting to write that book until someone tells you it's a good idea. Maybe you've been waiting to change careers until you have someone's blessing. Maybe you've been waiting to end a relationship that's no longer serving you until you find someone else to validate that decision. Maybe you've been waiting to pursue a dream until the conditions are perfect and everyone around you is supportive. What if I told you that the waiting is over? What if I told you that everything you need to take that next step is already within you? Not because I'm here telling you so, but because it's true whether I'm here or not. Whether anyone believes in you or not, whether the conditions are perfect or not. The strength you're looking for outside yourself has been inside you all along. The permission you're seeking from others is permission you can grant yourself. The courage you're waiting to feel is courage that comes from taking action, not from feeling ready. I've worked with thousands of people over the years, and I've noticed something interesting. The people who make the most dramatic positive changes in their lives are often the ones who reach a point where they stop talking about what they're going to do and simply start doing it. They stop seeking advice and start trusting their instincts. They stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating it. This doesn't mean they become reckless or inconsiderate of others. It means they recognize that at some point, all the planning, all the discussing, all the seeking of opinions has to give way to action. And that first action, that first step toward becoming who you're meant to be, is often a step you have to take alone. Think about a child learning to walk. They can watch others walk for months. They can have all the encouragement in the world. But at some point, they have to let go of the furniture and take that wobbly first step on their own. No one can do it for them. No amount of support can substitute for that moment when they trust their own balance and move forward. This is true for every significant transition in our lives. At some point, we have to let go of what's familiar and trust ourselves to navigate what's unknown. We have to stop living our lives by committee and start living them from our authentic center. I remember my own journey with this. For years in my early career, I was constantly seeking validation from my peers, from my supervisors, from anyone who would give me their opinion about my ideas and my work. I thought that if I could get enough people to agree with me, then I must be on the right track. But what I discovered is that living for other people's approval is exhausting and ultimately impossible. There will always be someone who disagrees with your choices, someone who thinks you should be doing something different, someone who believes they know what's best for your life better than you do. The turning point came when I realized that the voice I had been ignoring, my own inner voice, was actually the most reliable guide I had. Not because it was always right about everything, but because it was my voice, connected to my purpose, aligned with my values, and committed to my growth in a way that no external voice ever could be. When I started trusting that inner voice and taking action based on its guidance, even when others questioned my choices, everything began to shift. My work became more authentic, my relationships became more genuine, and my life became more fulfilling. But that shift began with a willingness to sometimes stand alone with my convictions. This is what I want you to understand. You have an inner guidance system that is more sophisticated than any external advice you could ever receive. It knows things about your life, your purpose, and your potential that no one else can know. But you can only access this wisdom when you create space for it, when you step away from the noise of other people's opinions and listen to the whisper of your own soul. Sometimes taking a step alone means making a career change that others don't understand. Sometimes it means ending a relationship that looks good on paper but doesn't feel right in your heart. Sometimes it means pursuing a dream that seems impractical to others but feels essential to you. Sometimes it means saying no to opportunities that others think you'd be crazy to refuse. Sometimes it means saying yes to possibilities that others think are too risky to pursue. Whatever form it takes, that step alone is not a rejection of community or relationship. It's a recognition that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And like any relationship, it requires time, attention, and trust to flourish. I think about the oak tree in my backyard. No one taught it how to be an oak tree. No committee of other trees voted on its growth pattern. It simply reached toward the light in its own unique way, trusting the intelligence within its own cellular structure. And because it grew authentically, it became strong enough to weather storms, flexible enough to bend without breaking, and beautiful enough to inspire everyone who sees it. You have that same intelligence within you. You have your own unique way of reaching toward the light. But you can only discover that way by sometimes stepping away from the crowd and listening to the wisdom that speaks only in the silence of solitude. I want to address something important. When I talk about taking steps alone, I don't mean becoming a hermit or cutting yourself off from the people who love you. Healthy relationships and supportive communities are essential to a fulfilling life. What I'm talking about is the ability to make decisions from your authentic center, rather than from fear, people-pleasing, or the need for constant validation. When you learn to take strong steps alone, you actually become a better friend, partner, and family member. You show up as your genuine self, rather than as the person you think others want you to be. You contribute your unique gifts, rather than trying to be all things to all people. You love others from a place of wholeness, rather than neediness. The people who truly care about you will respect your authenticity, even when they don't understand all your choices. And the people who only care about you when you're conforming to their expectations, well, those relationships weren't built on love anyway. They were built on control. I've seen this pattern over and over again. When someone begins to honor their authentic self and make decisions from their own inner wisdom, they often discover that their relationships actually improve. The people who are meant to be in their lives rise to meet this new level of authenticity, and the people who aren't meant to be there gradually fall away. It's a natural sorting process that happens when you stop trying to please everyone and start trying to be true to yourself. But here's the key. You can't wait for this sorting to happen before you take your authentic steps. You have to be willing to take those steps even if it means some people won't understand, even if it means some relationships might change, even if it means facing some temporary loneliness, because what you'll discover is that temporary loneliness is far better than permanent inauthenticity. What you'll discover is that standing alone with your truth is more fulfilling than standing with a crowd while denying who you really are. I want you to think about someone you admire, someone who has made a significant impact on the world. It could be someone famous or someone you know personally. I guarantee you that if you look closely at their story, you'll find moments when they had to stand alone with their vision, when they had to trust their inner knowing even when others doubted them. Martin Luther King Jr. spent many sleepless nights wrestling with the decision to become more actively involved in the civil rights movement, knowing it would put his family in danger, and many of his peers thought he was moving too fast. Rosa Parks made a split-second decision to refuse to give up her seat, not because a committee told her to, but because something inside her said enough. Gandhi left his successful law practice and comfortable life to pursue a path that most people thought was foolish and impractical. Mother Teresa felt called to leave her teaching position and work with the poorest of the poor, despite the concern of her supervisors and colleagues. These weren't reckless people. These were thoughtful, caring individuals who had reached a point where their inner calling was stronger than their need for external approval. They were willing to take those crucial first steps alone, because they understood that some paths can only be walked by one person at a time. And here's what's miraculous. Once they took those solitary steps, once they proved to themselves and the world that they were committed to their authentic path, supporters began to emerge. Communities formed around their vision. Movements grew from their individual courage. But it all started with someone willing to take a step alone. This is the paradox I want you to embrace. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone in order to eventually stand with others who share your authentic vision. Sometimes you have to risk temporary isolation in order to find your true tribe. Sometimes you have to leave the crowd you're with to find the community you belong to. Now, let me share something practical with you. If you're feeling called to take a step alone, but you're scared, that's perfectly normal. Fear is not a sign that you shouldn't take the step. It's often a sign that the step is important. The things that scare us most are often the things that will transform us most. But you don't have to take a giant leap. You can start with a small step. Maybe it's finally signing up for that class you've been thinking about for months. Maybe it's having a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's making a phone call, writing a letter, or simply setting aside an hour a day to reconnect with a dream you've been neglecting. The size of the step doesn't matter. What matters is that you take it from your authentic center, guided by your inner wisdom rather than external pressure or expectation. And here's something beautiful that happens when you start taking authentic steps. You begin to trust yourself more. Each time you listen to your inner guidance and act on it, you strengthen that connection. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you build your confidence in your own judgment. Each time you take a step alone and survive, even thrive, you prove to yourself that you're stronger than you thought. This self-trust becomes a foundation for everything else in your life. When you know you can count on yourself, when you know you can make good decisions and navigate challenges independently, you approach everything with more confidence and less anxiety. You stop looking for someone to save you and start recognizing your own power to create positive change. But perhaps most importantly, when you learn to take steps alone, you discover something profound. You're never really alone. There's a source of strength, wisdom, and guidance within you that is always available, always reliable, always loving. Some people call this God. Some call it the universe. Some call it intuition. Some call it the higher self. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you recognize this presence and learn to trust it. This presence has been with you through every challenge you've ever faced. It's been whispering guidance even when you weren't listening. It's been offering strength even when you didn't realize you were drawing on it. It's been loving you even when you didn't love yourself. When you take that step alone, you're not really alone. You're finally acknowledging the presence that has been there all along. You're finally partnering with the wisest, strongest, most loving force in your life, your own connection to the divine intelligence that created you. I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from now. Imagine that you've been taking authentic steps, following your inner guidance, trusting your own wisdom. What does your life look like? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? What kind of work are you doing? What kind of relationships do you have? What kind of impact are you making? Now imagine yourself 5 years from now having never taken those steps, still waiting for permission, still seeking approval, still playing it safe. What does that life look like? How do you feel in that scenario? The difference between these two futures is the steps you're willing to take alone. Starting today, I know it can be frightening to consider stepping away from the crowd, even temporarily. We're social beings, and the fear of rejection or abandonment runs deep. But I want you to consider this. What if the thing you're most afraid of losing by being authentic wasn't really yours to begin with? What if the approval you're afraid of losing was keeping you small? What if the relationships you're afraid of changing were preventing you from growing? What if the very thing you're afraid will happen if you take that step alone is actually the thing that needs to happen for you to become who you're meant to be? Sometimes we have to lose our false selves to find our true selves. Sometimes we have to release our small dreams to make room for our big dreams. Sometimes we have to disappoint some people in order to stop disappointing ourselves. This doesn't mean being inconsiderate or hurtful to others. It means recognizing that your first responsibility is to be true to the life you came here to live. It means understanding that the greatest gift you can give to the world is your authentic self, fully expressed and fully alive. I think about the caterpillar again, dissolving in that chrysalis. Imagine if the caterpillar tried to hold on to its caterpillar identity while attempting to transform into a butterfly. It would be impossible. Transformation requires letting go of who you've been to become who you're meant to be. And that letting go, that dissolution of the old self, often happens in solitude. But what emerges from that solitude is not isolation, it's integration. What emerges is not loneliness, it's wholeness. What emerges is not separation from others, it's authentic connection with others from a place of truth rather than neediness. As I close, I want you to remember this. You came into this world alone, and you will leave it alone. I don't say this to depress you, but to liberate you. In between your first breath and your last breath, you have the opportunity to live a life that is uniquely yours, to contribute something that only you can contribute, to love in a way that only you can love. But you can only do this if you're willing to sometimes stand alone with your truth, to trust your inner guidance even when others question it, to take steps toward your authentic life even when the path is unclear. The strongest step forward is indeed the one you take alone, not because it separates you from others, but because it connects you to yourself. And when you're truly connected to yourself, when you're living from your authentic center, when you're trusting your inner wisdom, you become a beacon of possibility for others who are still afraid to take their own solitary steps. Your willingness to stand alone becomes permission for others to do the same. Your courage to be authentic becomes an invitation for others to drop their masks. Your commitment to your own growth becomes a catalyst for their transformation. So take that step, take it alone if you must, but take it, trust yourself, trust the wisdom within you, trust the journey that only you can walk, trust that what you're seeking is also seeking you. And sometimes the fastest way to find it is to stop looking everywhere else and start looking within. The world doesn't need another copy of someone else. The world needs the original you. And the original you can only emerge when you're willing to step away from the crowd and listen to the voice that has been calling your name your entire life. That voice is calling you now. Can you hear it? It's time to take that step. It's time to discover just how strong you really are when you're walking your own path, guided by your own light, trusting your own heart. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and sometimes, the most important steps are the ones you take alone.